Echoes of the Unknown.
Chapter 1. The Discovery. When Music Finds You. My name is Zoe Martinez, and I own a vintage record store called Echoes of Time in the French Quarter of New Orleans. I've been collecting vinyl for over 15 years, and I thought I'd seen everything. Rare pressings, bootlegs, records that shouldn't exist. But nothing prepared me for the day I discovered a recording that contained more than just music. It was November 15, 2021, and Hurricane Ida's aftermath still lingered in the humid air. The city was rebuilding, but there was something different about the atmosphere. Heavier, more charged with unexplained energy. I'd been running my shop for 3 years, specializing in blues, jazz, and soul records from the 1940s through 1970s. My customers knew I had an eye for rarities, and they trusted my expertise. That morning, an elderly woman named Mrs. Boudreau shuffled into my shop carrying a weathered cardboard box. She was probably in her 80s, with silver hair braided down her back and eyes that seemed to hold decades of secrets. She wore a faded purple dress and smelled of lavender and something else, something earthier, like cemetery soil after rain. "Chila, I need to get rid of these," she said, setting the box on my counter with shaking hands. "They've been in my attic since my grandmother passed, and I can't have them in my house no more." I opened the box and immediately felt my heart race. Inside were about 30 vinyl records, most from the 1940s and 1950s, in remarkable condition. But it was the record on top that caught my attention, a 78 RPM pressing with a handwritten label that simply read, "Last Recording, Tommy Boudreau, October 31st, 1947. The vinyl itself was unusual. Instead of the typical black, it had a deep blue tint, almost like midnight water. The grooves seemed to shimmer under the store's fluorescent lights, and when I touched the surface, it felt warm, not from the New Orleans heat, but from something internal. "This is your family?" I asked, holding up the record. Mrs. Boudreau's face went pale. "My great-uncle. He was a blues musician, played all over the quarter back in the day. That record, that's the last thing he ever recorded before he died. What happened to him?" She shook her head quickly. "Some things better left buried, Chili. I just need them gone. Will you take them?" I should have asked more questions. I should have noticed the way her hands trembled when she looked at that particular record, or how she kept glancing over her shoulder as if someone was watching us. But I was too excited by the discovery. A previously unknown recording by a 1940s blues musician. This could be historically significant. I paid her a fair price for the entire collection, though she kept trying to give me more money back. "Please," she said as she prepared to leave. "Promise me you won't play that record alone, and if anything strange happens, throw it away. Don't try to understand it, just get rid of it." I laughed, thinking she was just being superstitious. "Mrs. Boudreau, I've been handling old records for years. I'm sure it's fine." She looked at me with an expression I can only describe as profound sadness. "That's what my grandmother said. That's what my mother said. That's what I said 40 years ago." She paused at the door. "Some music ain't meant to be heard, Chile. Some voices should stay silent." After she left, I spent the rest of the day researching Tommy Boudreau online. I found almost nothing. Just a few mentions in local newspapers about a blues musician who died in a recording studio fire in 1947. The articles were brief, mentioning only that he was a promising young artist whose career was cut tragically short. There were no photos, no other recordings, no detailed biography. It was as if someone had deliberately erased him from history. That evening I decided to listen to the record. My shop had a vintage turntable system that I used to test acquisitions, and I was curious about what Tommy Boudreau's music sounded like. I locked the front door, dimmed the lights, and placed the unusual blue-tinted vinyl on the turntable. The moment the needle touched the groove, I knew something was wrong. The sound that emerged wasn't just music, it was a complete auditory experience. I could hear not just Tommy's voice and guitar, but the ambient sounds of the recording studio, creaking floorboards, distant traffic, even the whisper of fabric as someone moved in the background. Tommy's voice was haunting, deep, rich, filled with a pain that seemed to go beyond typical blues melancholy. He was singing about loss, about being trapped, about voices that no one could hear. But it was the lyrics that made my blood run cold. "I'm singing from the other side of silence, where the living can't reach me no more. But if you play my song you'll join me in this place behind the studio door." As the song continued, I began to feel dizzy. The walls of my shop seemed to shimmer and bend, and the temperature dropped noticeably. I could smell something burning. Not the pleasant smell of a fireplace, but the acrid scent of electrical fire and melting plastic. Then I heard it, a voice that wasn't coming from the speakers. "Finally," it whispered. "Finally, someone who can hear me." I spun around, but I was alone in the shop. The voice seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere, like it was being broadcast directly into my mind. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking. The record continued playing, but now I could hear layers of sound that shouldn't have been there. Voices arguing in the background, the sound of footsteps on wooden floors, and underneath it all, a rhythmic knocking that sounded like someone trapped and trying to get out. "Don't stop the music," the voice pleaded. "I've been waiting so long for someone to hear me, so long to tell my story." I reached for the turntable to stop the record, but my hand passed right through the tone arm. I tried again, but it was as if the turntable existed in a different dimension from my physical body. The music continued, and with each note I felt myself being pulled deeper into something I didn't understand. The shop around me began to change. The modern fixtures faded, replaced by older equipment, tube amplifiers, ribbon microphones, recording equipment from the 1940s. The walls took on a different texture, and I could smell old cigarettes, whiskey, and that persistent burning scent. "Welcome to October 31st, 1947, the voice said. "Clearer now. Welcome to the night I died." Chapter 2. The First Loop. October 31st, 1947. I found myself standing in a recording studio that looked like it belonged in the 1940s. The walls were covered in thick carpets for soundproofing, and the air was thick with cigarette smoke. Vintage recording equipment hummed in the corner, and I could see the red light of a recording in progress sign glowing above the control room window. But I wasn't alone. A young black man, maybe 25 years old, sat in the center of the room with a guitar across his lap. He was thin, with intense dark eyes and calloused fingers that moved across the strings with practiced ease. This had to be Tommy Baudreau, though he looked nothing like I'd imagined from the sparse historical records. "You can see me," he said, looking directly at me. "That's new. Usually people just hear the music and think they're going crazy." "This isn't possible," I said, though my voice sounded hollow in the studio space. "You died in 1947. It's 2021. Tommy laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Time don't work the same way when you're trapped in a recording. I've been living this same night over and over for 74 years. October 31st, 1947. The night everything went wrong." "What happened?" Before he could answer, the studio door burst open. 3 men in 1940s suits entered, their faces hard and businesslike. The man in front was tall and thin, with slicked back hair and cold eyes. Behind him were 2 larger men, who looked like they'd be more comfortable breaking kneecaps than discussing music. "Time's up, Tommy," the thin man said. "We gave you a chance to do this the easy way." Tommy's grip tightened on his guitar. "I ain't signing nothing, Mr. Castellano. This is my music, my voice. You can't just take it." "Watch me," Castellano replied. He nodded to his 2 associates, who stepped forward menacingly. I watched in horror as the scene unfolded. Tommy tried to stand, but one of the men grabbed his arm. In the struggle, Tommy's guitar flew across the room, smashing against the wall. The sound echoed through the studio like a gunshot. "You don't understand," Tommy said, desperation creeping into his voice. "Without my music, I'm nothing. It's all I got left." "You'll have plenty of nothing where you're going," Castellano said coldly. That's when I noticed the smell of smoke growing stronger. Looking around the studio, I could see wisps of gray smoke seeping under the door. The men were so focused on Tommy that they hadn't noticed yet. "Fire!" I shouted, but no one seemed to hear me. I was watching this scene unfold, but I couldn't interact with it. I was a ghost in someone else's nightmare. The smoke grew thicker, and finally one of Castellano's men noticed. "Boss, we got a problem." They all turned toward the door, which was now outlined in orange light. The fire was spreading fast, and the old studio's soundproofing materials were feeding it like kindling. "Forget the contract," Castellano said. "Let's get out of here." But as they moved toward the door, it slammed shut with a force that shook the entire building. The handle rattled, but the door wouldn't budge. They were trapped. "What did you do?" Castellano demanded, turning on Tommy. "I didn't do nothing," Tommy replied, but his eyes were wide with fear. "The door just..." That's when I heard it, the sound of the record player in the control room, still spinning. The needle was skipping, creating a rhythmic scratching sound that seemed to be controlling the fire, the locked door, everything. "The recording," I whispered, understanding flooding through me. "It's still recording." Tommy must have heard me because he looked directly at me again. "That's right. The machine's still running, and it's capturing everything. The fire, the fear, the dying. It's all going onto that record." The fire was spreading faster now, and the men were beginning to panic. They threw themselves against the door, but it held firm. The smoke was getting thicker, and I could see the flames creeping along the walls. "Tommy," I called out, "you have to stop the recording." "I can't," he shouted back. "The machine's in the control room, and the fire's blocking the way." That's when I realized the true horror of the situation. Tommy hadn't just died in a fire. He'd been trapped in a recording studio while the machine was still running. His death, his fear, his final moments had all been captured on vinyl. And now, every time someone played that record, they were forced to relive his final night. The flames were getting closer, and the men's panic was turning to terror. Castellano was screaming orders that no one could follow, and his associates were crying like children. But Tommy had picked up the broken pieces of his guitar, and was trying to play. "If I'm going to die," he said, his voice barely audible over the crackling flames, "I'm going to die making music." His fingers found the strings, and despite the broken instrument, he managed to coax out a melody. It was haunting, beautiful, and filled with all the pain and hope of a man facing his end. The melody seemed to calm the fire slightly, creating a small pocket of cooler air around him. "That's it," I said, understanding. "The music is what's keeping you here. It's what's keeping you trapped." Tommy looked at me with desperate eyes. "I can't stop playing. If I stop, I disappear completely. At least this way I exist. At least this way my music lives on. But as he played, I could see the cost. His fingers were bleeding, his breathing was labored from the smoke, and the flames were getting closer. He was choosing to die rather than let his music be silenced. There has to be another way, I said. That's when the world began to shimmer again. The studio faded, the fire disappeared, and I found myself back in my record shop. But the music was still playing, that haunting melody that Tommy had created in his final moments. And I could still hear his voice, whispering from the speakers. "Play it again, please, it's the only way I can exist." I looked at the turntable, and the record was still spinning. But now I could see something in the grooves, shadows moving, trapped like insects in amber. And I realized that this wasn't just a recording of Tommy's death. It was a prison, and he was the only inmate. "How many times?" I asked the empty shop. "Every night for 74 years, came the reply. "Every night I die, every night I play my last song, and every night I hope someone will hear me and help me find a way out." I reached for the turntable again, but once more my hand passed through it. The record continued spinning, and I could feel myself being pulled back into that burning studio, back to October 31st, 1947, back to watch Tommy Boudreau die again. "Welcome to my world," his voice whispered as everything faded to flame and smoke. "Welcome to the loop." Chapter 3. Seeking Answers. The Music Historian. I woke up on the floor of my shop at 3:33 a.m. The record still spinning silently on the turntable. The song had ended, but I could still hear Tommy's voice echoing in my mind. My clothes were soaked with sweat, and I could smell smoke in my hair, though there was no fire anywhere in the shop. I stumbled to the turntable and carefully lifted the needle. The moment it disconnected from the vinyl, I felt a profound sense of loss, as if I'd just severed a connection to something important. The blue-tinted record sat there innocently, but I could swear I saw shadows moving in its grooves. I spent the rest of the night researching, desperate to understand what I'd experienced. I combed through online databases, historical archives, and local newspaper collections. By sunrise, I had found 3 more references to Tommy Boudreau, all from late 1947. The first was a small item in the Times-Picayune. Local musician Thomas "Tommy" Boudreau, 25, died in a fire at Crescent City Recording Studios on October 31st. The cause of the fire is under investigation. The second was from a jazz magazine. Rising blues talent Tommy Boudreau was reportedly working on a recording contract with Castellano Music Group before his untimely death in a studio fire. The third was the most disturbing. A police report that I found in the city archives. Fire at Crescent City Recording Studios ruled accidental. No evidence of foul play despite reports of locked doors and multiple victims. Case closed. Multiple victims. The report mentioned 4 men found in the studio. Tommy Boudreau, Vincent Castellano, and 2 unidentified associates. All had died from smoke inhalation, and all were found in the main recording room. The door had been locked from the inside, and there was no evidence of forced entry or exit. I called my friend Marcus, a jazz historian at Tulane University. If anyone could help me understand what I'd stumbled into, it would be him. "Zoe, it's 6 in the morning. Are you okay?" "Marcus, I need to know about Tommy Boudreau, a blues musician who died in 1947. There was a pause. "Where did you hear that name?" "You know him." "I know of him. He's what we call a lost voice. Musicians who died before their careers really took off, leaving behind only legends and stories. But Tommy's different. There are rumors." "What kind of rumors?" "The kind that serious historians don't talk about." "Can you meet me at the university? I have some materials that might interest you." An hour later, I was sitting in Marcus's cluttered office, surrounded by photographs, records, and manuscripts. Marcus was a thin man in his 50s with graying hair and the intense focus of someone who'd spent decades chasing musical ghosts. "Tommy Boudreau," he said, pulling out a manila folder. "One of the most talented blues musicians New Orleans has ever produced, and one of the most mysterious. He appeared on the scene in 1945, fresh from the war, and within 2 years had developed a reputation for songs that could make people weep just by hearing them." He showed me a photograph, the only known picture of Tommy. It was the same face I'd seen in the recording studio, but in the photo, he looked happy, alive, holding his guitar with pride. According to the stories, Tommy had a supernatural ability to capture emotions in his music. People said that when he played, you didn't just hear the song, you felt everything he was feeling. Some folks thought he'd made a deal with the devil. "What about Vincent Castellano?" Marcus's expression darkened. Vincent Castellano was a music producer, but not the legitimate kind. He had connections to organized crime, and was known for stealing songs from black musicians and selling them to white performers. In the 1940s, that kind of cultural theft was unfortunately common. So Castellano was trying to steal Tommy's music. The story goes that Tommy had written a song so powerful, so emotionally devastating, that Castellano knew it would make whoever performed it famous. But Tommy refused to sell. Marcus pulled out another document, a handwritten contract. This was found in the studio after the fire. It's a recording contract that would have given Castellano complete rights to Tommy's music, including the right to have other artists perform it, but Tommy didn't sign it. No, and according to the legend, Tommy's refusal to sign led to his death. But here's where it gets strange. After the fire, people started reporting unusual experiences. They'd hear Tommy's voice in their dreams, or catch glimpses of him in the French Quarter. Some said he was still trying to finish his last song. I felt a chill run down my spine. Marcus, what if it's not just a legend? What if Tommy really is still here, trapped somehow? Zoe, what exactly did you find? I told him everything. The record from Mrs. Boudreau, the experience in the studio, the loop of October 31st. Marcus listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious with each detail. You need to talk to old Pete, he said finally. Who's old Pete? A street musician who's been playing in the Quarter for 40 years. He claims to have met Tommy Boudreau in 19... We found old Pete that afternoon, sitting on a corner near Jackson Square with his guitar case open for tips. He was a weathered black man, probably in his 70s, with white hair and hands that moved across his guitar strings like they were extensions of his soul. Tommy Boudreau, he said when Marcus mentioned the name. Now that's a name I ain't heard in a while. Pete, this is Zoe. She's found something that might be connected to Tommy. Old Pete looked at me with eyes that seemed to see more than they should. You played his record, didn't you? The one from October 31st. I nodded, startled by his accuracy. Thought so. You got that look, like you've seen something that ain't supposed to be there. I had the same look 40 years ago when I first heard Tommy's voice. You actually met him. Met him. Chilly. I played with him. Every Halloween night for the past 40 years, Tommy shows up right here in the Quarter. He plays his guitar, sings his songs, and tries to finish what he started in that studio. But he's dead. Dead don't mean gone. Not when you got unfinished business. Tommy's been trying to complete his last recording for decades, the one that got interrupted by the fire. Old Pete began to play, and the melody that emerged was hauntingly familiar, the same song I'd heard Tommy playing in the burning studio. But he never could finish it. Every time he gets close, the loop starts over. October 31st, 1947, playing on repeat. How do we help him? You got to finish what he started. You got to let him complete the song. But warning, Chili, you play that record again, and you might not come back. Tommy's been alone for so long, he might not want to let you go. As old Pete spoke, I felt a familiar presence. The air around us grew cooler, and I could hear very faintly the sound of a guitar being tuned. Other people on the street didn't seem to notice, but I knew Tommy was there, listening to every word. He's here now, isn't he? I asked. Old Pete nodded. He follows that record wherever it goes. You take it home, he comes with you. You play it, he gets a little stronger. But you got to be careful. The longer you're connected to his world, the harder it becomes to leave. I looked around the crowded street, and for just a moment, I saw him, Tommy Boudreau, standing in the shadows between two buildings, his guitar in his hands, his eyes fixed on me with a mixture of hope and desperation. What does he want me to do? I asked. Old Pete's fingers stilled on his guitar strings. He wants you to help him finish his song. But to do that, you're going to have to go back to October 31st, 1947. And this time, you're going to have to stay until the end. Chapter 4. The Medium's Warning. Voices from Beyond. That evening I sat in my shop, staring at the blue-tinted record. Afraid to play it, but equally afraid to leave it silent. Tommy's presence was stronger now. I could feel him watching me, waiting for me to make a decision. The shadows in the corners of the shop seemed deeper, and every creak of the old building made me jump. I needed help from someone who understood the supernatural better than I did. Marcus had given me the contact information for Celeste Thibodeau, a psychic medium who'd been working in New Orleans for 30 years. She had a reputation for being both legitimate and practical. No crystal ball nonsense, just genuine communication with the other side. Celeste's shop was in the Marigny, a small space filled with candles, herbs, and the kind of comfortable clutter that suggested real work rather than tourist theatrics. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a colorful head wrap. "You're the record store owner," she said before I even introduced myself. "I've been expecting you." "Expecting me?" Tommy Boudreau has been trying to reach me for weeks, but his connection to this world is through music, not through the usual channels I work with. When you played his record, you became his anchor to the living world. We sat at a small table in the back of her shop, and Celeste lit a white candle between us. "Before we begin, I need you to understand something. What you're dealing with isn't just a ghost, it's a soul that's been trapped in a specific moment of time. That's very dangerous territory." "Dangerous how?" "Time loops like this create what we call temporal echo chambers. The longer a soul remains trapped, the more powerful the loop becomes. Tommy's been stuck for 74 years, which means his prison has had decades to strengthen. If you go back in there, you might not be able to get out." Celeste closed her eyes and placed her hands flat on the table. "He's here now. Tommy, I can feel you. Talk to me." The candle flame flickered, and the temperature in the room dropped noticeably. When Celeste spoke again, her voice had changed. It was deeper, with a slight accent that I recognized as Tommy's. "I'm so tired," the voice said, through Celeste. "So tired of dying every night. So tired of watching those men burn. So tired of my music being stolen." "Tommy," I said, "what do you need me to do?" "The song," he replied. "My last song. I was trying to record it when they came. It's about justice, about voices that can't be silenced. But I never got to finish it. What happened to the original recording? It burned with everything else. But the melody, the words, they're still in my head. They're all I have left. Celeste's normal voice returned. He's showing me something. A recording session, but not the one from October 31st. This is earlier, maybe a few days before. In my mind, I could see what she was seeing. Tommy in the same studio, working alone, writing lyrics in a notebook. He was excited, energized, working on something that clearly meant everything to him. He'd discovered something, Celeste continued. About Castellano, about other musicians who died under suspicious circumstances. The song he was writing wasn't just music, it was testimony. He was going to expose what Castellano had been doing. So they killed him to keep him quiet. Not intentionally. They came to force him to sign over his music rights, but the fire was an accident. A cigarette left burning, old electrical wiring, the kind of thing that happened in buildings like that. But Tommy's emotional state at the time of death, his anger, his desperation to finish the song, that's what created the loop. The candle flame suddenly flared higher, and I heard Tommy's voice directly, not through Celeste. They thought they could silence me. They thought death would stop my music. But I've been singing from the grave for 74 years, and I'm not stopping until the world hears what I have to say. Tommy, I said, if I help you finish the song, will you be able to move on? I don't know. I've been trapped for so long I don't remember what moving on feels like, but I know I can't keep living the same night forever. And I know those men's souls are trapped with me. We're all stuck in that burning studio, dying over and over again. Celeste opened her eyes, looking exhausted. There's something else. The loop isn't just affecting Tommy. Every time someone plays that record, they're feeding energy into the echo chamber. It's getting stronger. What does that mean? It means that eventually the loop might break free from the record entirely. October 31st, 1947 could start manifesting in the real world. Anyone near the record on Halloween night could get pulled back in time. I felt my blood run cold. Halloween is in 2 weeks, which means you have 2 weeks to help Tommy finish his song and break the loop, or risk having that night replay itself in your world. And this time, you wouldn't be just observer, you'd be trapped there permanently. As if summoned by our conversation, I heard the faint sound of guitar music coming from the direction of my shop. Tommy was getting stronger, and his influence was spreading. There's one more thing, Celeste said. The record you have, it's not the original, it's a copy, made by someone who understood the supernatural properties of Tommy's death. Someone wanted to preserve the loop. Who would do that? Someone who benefits from keeping Tommy's story buried. Someone who doesn't want his final song to be heard. That night, I called Mrs. Boudreau, the elderly woman who'd sold me the record. Her phone rang 6 times before she answered, and when she did, her voice was shaky and frightened. I told you not to play it, she said before I could even speak. I told you to throw it away. Mrs. Boudreau, I need to know where you got this record. It's important. It's been in my family for generations. My grandmother worked as a cleaning lady at Crescent City Recording Studios. She found it in the ruins after the fire, hidden in a metal box that somehow survived. Why did your family keep it? There was a long pause. Because Tommy was my great-uncle, and my grandmother couldn't bear to let his music die completely. She thought if she kept the record safe, someday someone would help him find peace. But you tried to get rid of it, because I learned the truth. That record ain't just a recording, it's a trap, and every Halloween night, Tommy gets stronger. Last year he appeared in my house, playing his guitar, begging me to help him finish his song. I couldn't handle it anymore. Mrs. Boudreau, do you know what song he was trying to finish? He called it The Last Truth. It was about all the musicians who died before their time, all the voices that got silenced. He said if he could finish it, their stories would finally be told. After we hung up, I sat in my shop listening to the sounds of the French Quarter at night. But underneath the usual noise of traffic and distant music, I could hear something else, a guitar playing the same haunting melody, growing stronger with each repetition. Tommy was running out of time, and so was I. In 2 weeks Halloween would arrive, and the loop would reach its maximum power. I had to decide, help Tommy finish his song, and risk being trapped forever, or let him remain in his prison for another year. But as I sat there in the darkness, I realized I'd already made my choice. I was going to help Tommy Boudreau finish his last song, no matter what the cost. The music was calling me back to October 31st, 1947, and this time, I was going to stay until the end.
Chapter 5. Entering the Loop. The final recording session. I waited until exactly midnight on Halloween night. The record sat on my turntable, that blue-tinted vinyl seeming to pulse with its own internal light. I'd spent 2 weeks preparing, researching 1940s recording techniques, learning about the equipment Tommy would have used, and most importantly, memorizing the partial lyrics that old Pete had transcribed for me. The French Quarter was alive with Halloween revelry outside, but inside my shop the air was thick with anticipation. I could feel Tommy's presence more strongly than ever, and I knew he was waiting for me to make the final commitment. "Okay, Tommy," I said to the empty shop. "Let's finish what you started." I placed the needle on the record, and immediately the world began to shift. But this time, instead of being pulled into the studio as a passive observer, I felt myself becoming part of the recording session. I was no longer just watching October 31st, 1947. I was living it. I found myself in the control room of Crescent City Recording Studios, wearing clothes that weren't mine, a 1940s dress and heels that felt strange on my feet. But I wasn't alone. Tommy was there, sitting in front of the recording equipment, his guitar in his hands. "You came back," he said, and his voice carried a mixture of hope and desperation. "I wasn't sure you would. I'm here to help you finish the song," I said. "But I need to understand what exactly happened that night." Tommy's fingers moved across the guitar strings, producing a melody that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. I'd been working on The Last Truth for months. It was my masterpiece, the song that would tell the world about what Castellano and men like him had been doing to musicians like me. What were they doing? Stealing our music, claiming it as their own, and when we protested, making sure we couldn't protest anymore. Some musicians just disappeared. Others died in accidents. I documented it all. Names, dates, songs that were stolen. As he spoke, I could see the lyrics appearing on sheets of paper scattered around the control room. They were powerful, angry, filled with the pain of artists who'd been silenced. But you never got to finish recording it. Castellano showed up with his men. They wanted me to sign over not just my music, but my voice. They had a contract that would have given them the right to use my name and likeness forever. When I refused, they tried to force me. And the fire started in the electrical panel. Old wiring, cigarette ash, the kind of accident that was common in buildings like this. But by the time we smelled smoke, the door was already blocked. We were trapped. The studio around us began to fill with that familiar acrid smoke, and I could hear voices in the distance, angry voices, getting closer. "They're coming," Tommy said. "The same scene plays out every time. But this time, you're here. This time maybe we can change it." "How?" "The recording equipment is still running. If we can get the song onto the tape before they arrive, before the fire spreads, maybe it'll break the loop." I moved to the recording console, trying to remember everything I'd learned about 1940s technology. The tape was rolling, the levels were set, and the red recording light was glowing. All Tommy had to do was play. "I need you to sing with me," Tommy said. "The song is about voices that can't be silenced. It needs more than one voice to work." The studio door burst open, and Castellano and his men entered, right on schedule. But this time, instead of confronting Tommy immediately, they stopped, confused by my presence. "Who's the dame?" one of them asked. "Doesn't matter," Castellano replied, but I could see uncertainty in his eyes. "Tommy, we've been through this. Sign the contract and we can all walk away from this." Tommy looked at me, and I nodded. He began to play, and I began to sing the lyrics I'd memorized. The song was about justice, about voices that transcend death, about truth that can't be buried no matter how deep you dig the grave. The men moved toward us, but something strange happened. As we sang, they began to slow down, as if they were moving through thick honey. The smoke that had been seeping under the door stopped spreading, and the temperature in the room stabilized. "Keep singing," Tommy said. "It's working." But I could feel the strain. The loop was fighting back, trying to reassert its control over the night. The fire was still burning somewhere in the building, and I could hear the sound of wood crackling and electrical systems failing. "We need to get to the end of the song," I said. "All of it." Tommy nodded and moved into the final verse, the part he'd never been able to complete. His voice grew stronger, more confident, and I found myself harmonizing with him in ways that shouldn't have been possible. It was as if the song itself was guiding us. From the ashes of the silenced, from the graves of the forgotten, comes a voice that won't be broken by the men who deal in lies. We are more than just our music. We are more than just our pain. We are truth that lasts forever. We are voices in the rain. As we sang the final words, something extraordinary happened. The studio began to fill with light, not the harsh fluorescent lighting of the recording session, but a warm golden glow that seemed to emanate from the music itself. And in that light I could see them, other musicians, other artists who'd been silenced over the years, all singing along with Tommy's song. Castellano and his men were frozen in place, watching in horror as the truth of their actions was literally sung into existence. The fire in the building stopped spreading, held back by the power of the completed song. "It's done," Tommy said, his voice filled with wonder. "After 74 years, it's finally done." The recording equipment clicked off, and the tape stopped rolling. The song was complete, preserved not just in the grooves of a vinyl record, but in the fabric of reality itself. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we can let go," Tommy replied. "The loop is broken. The story is told. Justice has been served." The other musicians in the light began to fade, their faces peaceful, their voices joining in a final chorus that seemed to fill the entire universe. Castellano and his men were dissolving too, their forms becoming translucent as the night that had trapped them finally came to an end. "Thank you," Tommy said to me, "for hearing my voice, for helping me finish what I started. Will I see you again? Not in this world, but whenever someone plays The Last Truth, whenever someone listens to the voices that almost got silenced, I'll be there." The studio began to fade around us, and I felt myself being pulled back to my own time. But as I left 1947 behind, I could still hear the song playing, not the desperate, incomplete version that had been trapped in the loop, but the full, powerful, completed version that would never be silenced again. I opened my eyes to find myself back in my record shop, but everything had changed. The blue-tinted record was still on the turntable, but now it was just a normal piece of vinyl. The supernatural energy was gone, replaced by something much more powerful, the simple truth of a story that had finally been told.
Chapter 6. The Truth Revealed. Justice at Last. I woke up the next morning to find my shop filled with sunlight and the sound of normal French Quarter activity. The record was still on the turntable, but something fundamental had changed. The vinyl was no longer blue-tinted. It was standard black, and when I held it up to the light, I could see that the grooves contained something that hadn't been there before. I placed the needle on the record and listened to the last truth in its completed form. It was everything Tommy had promised. A powerful, haunting song about artists who'd been silenced, about justice delayed but not denied, about voices that transcend death itself. But more than that, it was proof. As the song played, I could hear not just Tommy's voice and guitar, but the voices of other musicians joining in, dozens of them, all singing the names of artists who died under suspicious circumstances, all testifying to the crimes that had been committed against them. The recording included spoken testimony, dates, locations, and most importantly, the names of the men responsible. Vincent Castellano's voice was there too, captured in the moments before his death, confessing to crimes that had been covered up for decades. I realized that Tommy had done something extraordinary. By completing his song within the supernatural loop, he'd created a recording that existed in multiple timelines simultaneously. It contained not just music, but actual evidence of historical crimes. I called Marcus immediately. "You need to get over here," I said. "I have something that's going to change jazz history." When Marcus arrived, I played him the complete recording. He sat in stunned silence, occasionally taking notes, his face growing more amazed with each verse. "This is impossible," he said when it ended. "This recording contains information that was never documented. Names, dates, details about musicians who died in the 1940s and 1950s. If this is authentic, it's authentic," I assured him. Tommy Boudreau finished his song. He told his story, and now the world can hear it. Marcus spent the next week analyzing the recording with equipment at the university. The results were extraordinary. The vocal tracks matched samples of Tommy's voice from contemporary recordings. The background voices belonged to musicians who'd been documented as dying under suspicious circumstances. Even the confession from Vincent Castellano matched his speech patterns from surviving radio interviews. "This is going to revolutionize our understanding of the music industry in the 1940s, Marcus told me. "There are at least 20 cases here that were never properly investigated. Musicians who died in accidents that were actually murders. Songs that were stolen and credited to other artists. This is the missing piece of jazz history." But the most important discovery came when Marcus ran the recording through advanced audio analysis software. Hidden in the background of the song were frequency patterns that matched police reports from the 1940s, reports that had been buried or lost over the decades. "Tommy didn't just create a song," Marcus explained. "He created a historical document that proves decades of corruption and murder in the music industry. This is going to expose criminals who thought they'd gotten away with their crimes." I contacted Detective Sarah Mills, who'd helped me with the photograph case 2 years earlier. She was now working with the NOPD's cold case unit, and when she heard the recording, she immediately recognized its significance. "This is evidence in multiple unsolved murders," she said. "I know it sounds impossible, but everything on this recording checks out. Dates, locations, details that were never made public. We're going to reopen at least 15 cases." Within a month, The Last Truth had become a sensation. Music historians, journalists, and law enforcement agencies were analyzing every word, every note, every background sound. The recording had exposed a conspiracy that had claimed the lives of dozens of musicians over a 20-year period. Vincent Castellano's music company was revealed to have been a front for organized crime. The accidents that had killed so many promising artists were shown to be murders, designed to steal their music and silence their voices. The few surviving members of Castellano's organization were arrested, though most of the perpetrators had died decades earlier. But the most powerful impact was cultural. The Last Truth gave voices back to artists who'd been erased from history. Musicians who died unknown were finally credited with their work. Songs that had been stolen were returned to their rightful creators. Old Pete came to my shop the day after the story broke nationally. "You did it," he said, tears in his eyes. "You helped Tommy finish his song." "We all did it," I replied. "Tommy, you, Marcus, everyone who believed his story was worth telling." "I saw him last night," Pete said. "Tommy, he was standing right here in the quarter, playing his guitar. But he looked different, peaceful, like he was finally ready to rest." "Did he say anything?" "He said to tell you thank you. And he said that his voice ain't the only one that needs to be heard. There are others, other stories, other truths that need to be told." That night, I sat in my shop listening to the sounds of the French Quarter. But now, instead of hearing just the present, I could hear echoes of the past, voices of musicians who'd played in these streets, stories that had been silenced, truths that were waiting to be discovered. I realized that my experience with Tommy Boudreau had changed me. I was no longer just a record store owner. I was a guardian of musical history, a voice for the voiceless, a keeper of stories that the world needed to hear. The blue-tinted record still sat on my turntable, but now it was a symbol of something greater than just one man's story. It was proof that truth, like music, can transcend time and death. It was evidence that voices can't be silenced forever, no matter how powerful the forces trying to suppress them. And as I locked up the shop that night, I could swear I heard Tommy's voice one last time, carried on the New Orleans wind. Thank you for listening. Thank you for helping me sing my last song. Now it's time for other voices to be heard.
Chapter 7. Echoes of the Unknown. The legacy lives on. 6 months after the last truth changed everything, my shop had become something I never expected. A pilgrimage site for musicians, historians, and anyone who believed that some stories are too important to remain buried. The record that had started it all now sat in a place of honor. No longer cursed but blessed. No longer a prison but a gateway to understanding. I'd started a non-profit organization called Voices of the Past, dedicated to uncovering the stories of musicians who died under suspicious circumstances. We'd already identified 17 cases similar to Tommy's, and with each investigation we discovered more evidence of systematic suppression of artistic voices. The most remarkable case came from a young musician named David Chen, who walked into my shop on a rainy Tuesday in April 2022. He was carrying a battered guitar case and had the same desperate look in his eyes that I'd learned to recognize, the look of someone who'd encountered something beyond normal experience. "I heard about what you did for Tommy Boudreau," he said. "I think I need your help." David was a jazz guitarist who'd been playing in the French Quarter for 5 years. 3 weeks earlier, he'd found an old trumpet in an abandoned building scheduled for demolition. The instrument was tarnished and dented, but when he'd cleaned it up and tried to play it, something extraordinary had happened. "I could play music I'd never learned," he explained. "Complex jazz arrangements, melodies that seemed to come from somewhere else. But every time I played, I felt like someone was watching me, someone who was trying to tell me something." I examined the trumpet. It was from the 1950s, and engraved on the bell was a name, property of Marcus Williams, 1954. A quick search revealed that Marcus Williams had been a promising young trumpet player who died in a car accident in 1955, just before he was supposed to record his first album. "David," I said, "I think Marcus Williams is trying to finish his music through you." Unlike Tommy's situation, Marcus's connection to his instrument was gentler, more collaborative. He wasn't trapped in a loop of death and trauma. He was simply a musician who died before his time, looking for someone who could help him complete his artistic vision. Working with Marcus through David, we were able to record an album of music that Marcus had been working on in 19. The songs were beautiful, complex jazz arrangements that showcased a talent that had been cut short by tragedy. But more importantly, they provided closure for Marcus's surviving family members, who'd wondered for decades what their brother might have accomplished if he'd lived. The success of the Marcus Williams project attracted attention from musicians around the world. My shop became a clearinghouse for stories about instruments that seemed to carry the memories of their previous owners, songs that appeared in dreams, and melodies that seemed to come from beyond the grave. Not all of these cases were supernatural. Many were simply the result of musicians being inspired by the stories of those who'd come before them. But some, perhaps a dozen in the past year, showed genuine signs of spiritual communication. There was Elena Vasquez, a violinist who'd inherited her great-grandmother's instrument, and found herself playing pieces that her great-grandmother had composed but never written down. There was James Murphy, a drummer who'd discovered that his vintage kit had belonged to a musician who died in the 1960s and was trying to finish a protest song about civil rights. Each case taught me something new about the power of music to transcend death, about the importance of preserving artistic voices, and about the responsibility we all have to ensure that no story goes untold. The most profound lesson came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Boudreau, the elderly woman who'd sold me Tommy's record, returned to my shop one year after our first meeting. She looked healthier, more at peace, and she was carrying a new box of records. "These belonged to my grandfather," she said. "He was a musician too. Back in the 1920s, I thought maybe it was time to let his music be heard." As we went through the records, Mrs. Boudreau told me about her family's musical history. For generations, the Boudreau family had been musicians, but they'd also been the keepers of musical history. They'd preserved recordings, instruments, and stories that would otherwise have been lost. "Tommy ain't the only one who needed his story told," she said. "There are dozens of musicians in these records, all of them with something to say. I've been holding on to their voices for too long." That conversation led to the creation of the Boudreau Archive, a collection of recordings, photographs, and documents that told the story of New Orleans music from the perspective of the musicians themselves. It became the foundation for a permanent exhibition at the New Orleans Jazz Museum, ensuring that voices like Tommy's would never be silenced again. But perhaps the most important impact of my experience with Tommy Boudreau was personal.
I'd learned that being a guardian of musical history wasn't just about preserving recordings, it was about preserving the human stories behind the music. Every song had a story, every musician had a voice, and every voice deserved to be heard. On Halloween night 2022, exactly 1 year after helping Tommy complete his song, I held a concert in my shop. Musicians from around the city came to perform songs by artists who died before their time, ensuring that their music would continue to live and breathe in the present. Old Pete was there, of course, playing the melody that Tommy had taught him. Marcus played some of the arrangements from the Marcus Williams album. Elena performed one of her great-grandmother's compositions. And David played a new piece that had come to him in a dream, a song that seemed to speak for all the musicians who'd been silenced over the years. As the concert ended, and the musicians packed up their instruments, I felt a familiar presence. Not Tommy. He'd found his peace and moved on. But the sense that I was surrounded by the spirits of countless musicians who'd found their voices through the work we were doing. "Thank you," I whispered to the empty shop. "Thank you for trusting me with your stories." And in the silence that followed, I could swear I heard a chorus of voices responding. Dozens of musicians, from different eras and different styles, all singing the same message. The music never dies, the voices never fade, and the truth always finds a way to be heard. I locked up my shop that night, knowing that my work was far from over. Somewhere in the city there were other instruments waiting to be discovered, other stories waiting to be told, other voices waiting to be heard, and I would be there to listen, to help, and to ensure that no musician's story would ever be silenced again. The record that had started it all still sat on my turntable, but now it was surrounded by dozens of others, a growing collection of voices from the past, all contributing to an ever-expanding symphony of human experience. Tommy Boudreau had wanted his voice to be heard, and in helping him achieve that goal, I'd learned that every voice matters, every story deserves to be told, and every truth, no matter how long it's been buried, will eventually find its way to the surface. The music never dies, the voices never fade, and the truth always finds a way to be heard.